This week and next week in Israel, the siren blares on Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron, stopping us for a moment of silence to remember tragedy and sacrifice in preparation for celebrating our independence, achieved 75 years ago after 1900 years of dispersion. This is the season for acknowledging the millions of our people murdered in the Shoah, the many thousands who gave their lives to reestablish and defend our nation in its land, the many civilians who've been victims of an enemy motivated by hatred and revenge. This idea is amazingly encapsulated in one short verse of last week's Torah portion, Shminei, Vayikra 10:3, which reflects the spirit of these weeks by presenting two responses to the sudden tragic deaths of Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron. As leader, Moshe's immediate response was to sanctify their deaths. Hu asher diber Adonai lemor bekrovai ekadesh ve'al pnei chol ha'am ekabed. The Lord spoke, I am sanctified by those close to me and glorified by all the people. Rashi quotes from a midrash in which Moshe adds that Aaron's dead sons were worthier than Aaron and him, as they gave their lives to dedicate the Mishkan. In this interpretation, the midrash defines the model of Kiddush Hashem for sanctifying God's name in the world, which became the historic response of Jews to persecution and tragedy. It's still invoked by our leaders to comfort survivors and motivate others to act by the example of the fallen. Aaron's tragedy was far more personal than Moshe, as is his response within the same verse. Vayidom Aharon. Aaron stood silent. And to me, that silence has always felt right. There are times when all words and their meaning seem inadequate, when silence is all there is. And indeed, Rashi uses another midrash stating that Aaron was rewarded for his silence. As Jews, we know we have to speak and seek meaning through words. Lilmod ulilamed. Holocaust studies are a very Jewish response to our tragedy. Literally billions of words of research have been published on the Shoah. We study and teach it in schools and institutions around the world. Lilmod ulilamed. Yet we study and teach knowing that all the research in the world can never really provide an answer to the simple basic question, why? With no adequate answers available, often there's a third response, which appears in the Haftarah of Parshat Shmini, from the book of Shmuel. While transporting the Ark of the Covenant, Uzzah is struck down dead for grabbing hold of the Ark in order to prevent it from falling to the ground. David, King David's response to the inexplicable death of an innocent, heroic young man is to become angry with God. As opposed to Moshe's example of Kiddush Hashem, in the face of difficulties, sometimes leaders use anger and indignation to signal and lead the people. Some go further and seek to blame a common enemy. If that doesn't work, sometimes they identify a scapegoat to turn people against each other, and in doing so profane God's name, just the opposite of Kiddush Hashem. At the foot of Mount Carmel, Eliyahu put to the sword the 400 prophets of Baal that he'd already defeated, yet found no answers by meting out justice in this way. He finally found his peace in the silence of Sinai, where he learned to hear the still, small voice of God at its source. The additional lesson from Aaron's silence and Eliyahu's bloodlust is to listen for that voice before responding. This is a season when moments of silence and quietly listening to the stories of Shoah survivors and bereaved families seems right, humbling us and providing needed perspective for our own troubles. The search for truth and for responses to these troubled times begins with silence and listening. Shavua Tov and Chag Sameach from Schechter.